In the heart of a world where struggle often overshadows hope, this is the story of a young woman whose life was shaped by a hardship, faith, and unbreakable spirit. From serving drinks in a small bar while dreaming of better future, to rising into a position of purpose and impact. Daniel's journey is one of resilience and quiet determination. Unbeknownst to her, destiny was already waving a path far greater than she could imagine, one that could lead her not only to success but to a life-changing reunion with a past she thought was lost forever. At the center of this story stands Ruth, a woman of the strength, compassion, and hidden story, whose own journey from pain to purpose could collide with Danelah's in the most expected way. Together, their lives unfold into a powerful narrative of family, forgiveness, love, and restoration, proving that even in the darkest seasons, hope can rise and broken stories can be rewritten into something beautiful. Watch Danelah's story until it ends and don't forget to follow and like. Stay tuned.
After Ruth disappeared, nothing in Mr. Jimmy's house was ever the same again, because the laughter that once filled the rooms slowly died, and the walls that once felt warm began to feel cold and empty, as if sadness had settled there and decided to stay forever. Mr. Jimmy searched everywhere for Ruth, asking neighbors, friends, churches, and even strangers on the street, but no one could tell him where she had gone, and each day that passed without answers made his heart heavier and his hope weaker. Gabriella cried almost every night, holding little Danellah close to her chest, telling her stories about her sister Ruth, hoping that one day Ruth would walk through the door and smile like before. But that day never came. As time went on, money stopped coming, food became scarce, and the little savings they had finished because Mr. Jimmy could no longer find steady work, and people in the area began to avoid him as if his family's pain was a sickness they were afraid to catch. Soon, hunger entered their lives like an unwanted visitor, and there were days when the family slept with empty stomachs, listening to the noise of the busy city outside while their own home remained silent and broken. Danellah watched other children go to school with clean clothes and full lunchboxes, while she stayed behind feeling small and forgotten, and learning too early that life was not always fair. The city around them was loud and fast, full of cars, shouting traders, and tall buildings. But inside Mr. Jimmy's house, everything moved slowly, because poverty has a way of making time feel heavy and painful. Sometimes the family had no choice but to beg for food, standing by the roadside with shame in their eyes while people passed by, some helping, some laughing, and many pretending not to see them at all. Mr. Jimmy felt broken inside because as a father he believed he had failed his family, and every night he asked God why his daughter Ruth had disappeared and why suffering had chosen his home. Little Danellah did not fully understand everything, but she felt the pain deeply because she could see it in her parents' faces and hear it in their quiet cries when they thought she was asleep. And so, with Ruth gone and hope slowly fading, the family entered a long season of hardship, not knowing that somewhere beyond their tears a new path was quietly being prepared, even though none of them could see it yet. Far away from Mr. Jimmy's broken house and the quiet crying of Gabriella and Danellah, Ruth was still alive, even though everyone believed she was gone forever, because sometimes life hides a person not to destroy them, but to prepare them for something greater. Ruth had passed through fear, confusion, and loneliness after she disappeared, moving from place to place like a leaf carried by strong wind, sleeping with worry in her heart and questions in her mind, wondering why life had turned against her so suddenly. Many nights she cried softly, asking God why she was separated from her family, why hunger and fear followed her everywhere, and why her name seemed to bring only pain, but even in her tears she refused to stop believing that God was watching her. One night, when Ruth felt completely tired and empty inside, as if she had reached the end of her strength, God opened a new door for her, not with loud thunder or bright light, but with a quiet chance that came through a kind stranger who spoke to her about Lagos, a big Nigerian city full of noise, traffic, tall buildings, and endless struggle, yet also full of opportunity for those who refused to give up. Ruth felt something strong in her heart, like a gentle push, telling her that her story was not over, and that Lagos was where her new life would begin, even though she had no money, no friends, and no clear plan. The journey to Lagos was long and difficult, because Ruth traveled with fear sitting beside her and hope holding her hand, watching the road change from quiet paths to busy highways filled with buses, shouting conductors, and people rushing like they were chasing tomorrow. When she finally arrived, the city welcomed her with heat, noise, and movement, because Lagos never sleeps, and everywhere Ruth looked, she saw people fighting for survival, selling goods by the roadside, running after buses, and working hard just to eat one meal a day. At that moment, Ruth understood that Lagos would not be kind to her, but she also knew that if she could survive here, she could survive anywhere. Standing in the middle of that busy city with her small bag and tired body, Ruth whispered a prayer, asking God to guide her steps, because she had nothing left except faith and the strong belief that her suffering had meaning. And as she took her first steps into the crowded streets of Lagos, not knowing where to sleep or what to eat the next day, her old life officially ended there, while a new and difficult chapter quietly began, leading her straight into the hard struggle that would shape the woman she was about to become. Ruth's new life in the busy city did not bring comfort or rest, because Lagos tested her every single day, teaching her quickly that survival in a big Nigerian city is not easy, especially for someone who has no family, no money, and no place to call home. At first, Ruth slept anywhere she could find safety, sometimes on a wooden bench near a shop, sometimes in a small corner behind closed stalls, always waking up early before people could chase her away, because the city had no mercy for those who looked weak or lost. Each morning, she washed her face with borrowed water, tied her hair neatly, and stood up strong, even when her body felt tired and her heart felt heavy, because she had already decided that giving up was not an option. After watching people closely, Ruth noticed that many men and women survived by selling things on the roadside, shouting to passing cars and rushing buses, so she gathered courage and used the little help she received from kind people to buy soft drinks and small food items, carrying them in a cooler and walking under the hot sun from street to street. Some days people bought from her, smiling and encouraging her, but many days people ignored her or pushed her aside, treating her like she did not exist. And those moments hurt her deeply, because she remembered how life once felt safe and full of love. Still, Ruth kept going because hunger is a strong teacher, and the fear of sleeping without food pushed her forward even when her legs felt weak. The city noise surrounded her always, with car horns, loud music, angry voices, and fast footsteps, and Ruth felt small inside that giant movement, like one tiny drop in a very big ocean. Yet she learned to stand her ground, speaking politely to customers, smiling even when her heart was breaking, and protecting her goods from thieves who tried to take advantage of her kindness. At night, when she counted her small earnings, sometimes barely enough to eat, she whispered prayers to God, telling him about her pain, her loneliness, and her dreams, believing that even if the world ignored her, God was still listening. As weeks turned into months, Ruth slowly became stronger, not just in body, but in spirit, because hardship taught her patience, rejection taught her humility, and the streets taught her wisdom that no school could give. And while she struggled daily under the sun and inside the restless city, she did not know that this painful season of selling drinks and food on the roadside was shaping her for a future that would soon begin to rise from the same streets that once tried to break her. As time passed and Ruth continued to wake up every morning before the sun fully rose, something slowly began to change, even though she did not notice it at first, because blessings often grow quietly before they become loud. People who passed by her every day started to recognize her face, her gentle voice, and the way she treated everyone with respect. And little by little, customers began to choose her spot instead of others, because they felt peace and honesty around her. Ruth noticed that her cooler no longer returned home full, and some evenings she counted more money than usual, which surprised her so much that she knelt down quietly to thank God, knowing very well that this small change did not come from her strength alone. With the extra money, Ruth improved her small business carefully, buying more drinks, adding cooked food, and choosing better places where people gathered, such as busy bus stops and crowded junctions, even though standing there meant dealing with noise, insults, and tired feet. The city still tested her patience because there were days when rain scattered customers, police chased roadside sellers, and thieves tried to cheat her, yet Ruth did not return to anger or bitterness because she remembered how far she had come and refused to let fear control her future. Her name began to spread among drivers, office workers, and traders who told others that Ruth sold good food and spoke with kindness. And before she realized it, strangers were greeting her like someone they had always known. One day an opportunity came that Ruth never expected, because a man who often bought from her asked why she was still selling on the roadside when she had the heart and discipline of a business owner. And that question stayed with her for days, pushing her to dream beyond survival. Ruth saved her money slowly, denying herself comfort, ignoring laughter from people who mocked her small vision, and finally rented a tiny space where she could sell without fear of being chased away. And when she opened that place, she cried, because it felt like proof that her suffering was not wasted. Standing inside that small space, Ruth looked back at the long days of hunger, rejection, and loneliness, and she understood that God had been walking with her all along, turning her tears into strength and her patience into reward. And as customers filled the small shop and her confidence grew, Ruth's life crossed a quiet line, moving from mere survival into a future filled with promise, which would soon lead her to use her blessing not only for herself, but also for others who were hurting just like she once was. As Ruth's small shop continued to grow and her days were no longer filled only with fear of hunger, her heart began to remember the pain she once lived with, because even though her life was improving, she could not forget the children she saw sleeping under bridges, begging at traffic lights, or wandering the streets with tired eyes and empty hands. Every time Ruth looked at those children, she saw herself, she saw Danellah, and she saw the many nights she had cried alone, and this made her heart heavy in a way that money alone could not fix. She began to feel that her blessing was not meant to stop with her because God had lifted her from the ground for a reason bigger than comfort and success. Ruth started helping in small ways at first, sometimes giving food to hungry children, sometimes paying school fees for one child she met often near her shop, and sometimes listening to their stories when no one else cared, and these small acts filled her with a kind of joy she had never felt before. People around her noticed her kindness and began to support her, bringing clothes, food, and small donations. And soon Ruth realized that what started as a simple desire to help was becoming something much bigger than she imagined. With prayer, careful planning, and advice from people who believed in her vision, Ruth officially started a company called Open Heaven Care Initiative, a place meant to give orphans food, shelter, education, and hope for a better tomorrow. The beginning was not easy, because society does not always support kind dreams, and many people doubted her, asking how a woman who once sold drinks on the roadside could manage such a big responsibility, but Ruth did not allow their words to shake her, because she knew where she was coming from and who had carried her through the storm. She used her business experience to manage the company well, keeping records, hiring helpers, and making sure every child was treated with love and dignity. And slowly the impact of Open Heaven Care Initiative began to spread across the city. As more people heard about Ruth's work, support came from different places, including churches, local leaders, and even people outside Nigeria who were touched by her story, and Ruth's life fully changed from a woman struggling to survive into a woman transforming lives. And while her company grew and her name became respected, far away from her success, Mr. Jimmy's family continued to suffer in silence, unaware that the child they once lost was now becoming the answer to prayers they had stopped believing would ever be answered. While Ruth's name was slowly becoming known in the busy city and her company was bringing light into the lives of many children, Mr. Jimmy's house remained covered in darkness because poverty had refused to leave them, holding their lives tightly like a strong chain. The famine that had followed Ruth's disappearance did not end. and each year only seemed harder than the one before. As food became more expensive, jobs became fewer, and people who once greeted them with kindness now looked away in shame or fear. Mr. Jimmy grew thinner and quieter, spending long hours sitting outside, staring at the road, as if he was still waiting for Ruth to appear one day and end their suffering with her return. Gabriella struggled to keep the home together, doing small jobs for neighbors when she could, washing clothes, cleaning houses, and sometimes working from morning till night just to earn money that could only buy one small meal. Many nights the family shared food in silence, dividing it carefully so everyone could taste something, while hunger still remained in their stomachs, and Danella learned to eat slowly, pretending she was full so her parents would not feel bad. Society was not kind to them because people often judged them, whispering that their misfortune was punishment or failure, and these words hurt more than hunger itself because they made the family feel invisible and unwanted. Danella grew into a young woman inside this hardship, watching her parents grow older and weaker and feeling a deep pain in her heart each time she saw her father fail to provide and her mother cry quietly at night. She wanted more for them, more than begging and waiting, more than praying without answers, and she began to feel that staying in that place would only lead them deeper into suffering. Even though fear filled her heart, Danella started thinking about leaving home to search for work in the city, because she believed that if she could change her own life, she might be able to save her parents too. And so, as hunger continued to sit at their table and hope seemed almost gone, Danella made a quiet decision in her heart, one that would soon push her onto a difficult road of sacrifice and struggle, carrying her away from the only home she had ever known and straight toward a city that would test her strength just like it once tested her sister, even though she did not know it yet. The morning Danella decided to leave home, the sky looked normal, but her heart was heavy because she knew she was about to step into a world she did not understand, carrying only courage, fear, and love for her parents. She packed a small bag with a few worn clothes, hugged her mother tightly, and looked into her father's tired eyes, promising them that she would try her best to find work and send help back home, even though she was not sure how she would do it. Mr. Jimmy wanted to stop her because the city was dangerous and full of people who took advantage of the weak, but he also knew that staying had already broken them slowly, so with shaking hands and silent prayers, he allowed her to go. The journey to the city was long and confusing for Danella, because everything moved too fast, with loud buses, shouting conductors, and crowds that did not care about her fear or her tears. When she arrived, the city did not welcome her kindly, because no one was waiting for her, no job was ready for her, and no place felt safe enough to rest. And she quickly learned that in a big Nigerian city, people only notice you when you are useful. Danella walked from street to street, asking for work, entering shops, bars, and restaurants, only to be turned away again and again, while hunger and disappointment followed her closely like shadows. After many days of rejection and sleeping in uncomfortable places, Danella finally found work in a bar, not because it was her dream, but because it was the only door that opened, and survival does not always give choices. The work was hard and sometimes humiliating because she stood for long hours, cleaned tables, served drinks, and smiled at people who did not respect her, all while loud music filled the air and the smell of alcohol stayed on her clothes. Society judged her quickly, assuming things about her life without knowing her story, and many nights she cried alone, asking God if this suffering would ever turn into something better. Still, Danella endured, sending small money home whenever she could, encouraging her parents with hopeful words, even when her own heart felt tired and empty. And as months slowly turned into years, she remained in that bar, growing stronger on the inside, while waiting for a change she could not yet see, not knowing that destiny was quietly moving toward her through a screen she looked at every day, preparing to shift her life in a way she never imagined. 3 long years passed while Danella worked in the bar, and during that time, her life followed the same tiring pattern every day. Because she woke up early, worked until her feet ached, and returned to her small room feeling empty but still hopeful. The city continued to move fast around her, with new faces, new buildings, and new stories, yet her own life felt stuck, as if she was running but not moving forward, and this made her question whether all her sacrifice was truly worth it. Even so, she did not stop sending small help home or praying for a better future. because she believed that one day her suffering would make sense. One evening, while Danellah was serving customers in the bar, the television hanging on the wall suddenly caught her attention because the sound changed and the screen showed a clean, bright image of a successful company being talked about on the news. As she paused for a moment, holding a tray in her hands, she heard the presenter speak about Open Heaven Care Initiative, a fast-growing organization in the city that was helping orphans and changing lives, and something inside her stirred, even though she did not understand why. The camera showed the company's buildings, happy children, and well-dressed workers, and Danellah felt a strange pull in her heart, as if she was looking at a future she desperately wanted to be part of. When the news announced that the company was looking for new workers and managers, Danellah's heart began to beat faster, because this felt different from every other opportunity she had seen before, and for the first time in years, hope rose strongly inside her. She stood there listening carefully, memorizing every detail, while customers shouted for attention and the noise of the bar tried to pull her back into reality. Yet her mind had already left that place. That night, she could not sleep because her thoughts were filled with dreams of a life beyond the bar, a life of dignity, respect, and growth. With trembling hands but strong determination, Danellah prepared her application, telling her story honestly and simply, even though she felt small compared to the many people who would apply. And as she submitted it, she whispered a quiet prayer, not knowing that the face behind that powerful company was someone deeply connected to her past, and that this single moment in front of a television screen was the bridge destiny used to guide her toward a reunion that would soon change everything. A few weeks passed after Danellah sent her application, and every day she returned to the bar with the same tired routine, serving drinks, cleaning tables, and watching people laugh and enjoy themselves while her own heart ached for something better. She tried not to hope too much, because hope had disappointed her before, but deep inside she could not stop imagining a life where she could work with purpose, be respected, and build a future not only for herself, but for her parents as well. Then, one busy morning, a call came that would change her life forever. The voice on the phone was polite and professional, inviting her to an interview at Open Heaven Care Initiative, the very company she had watched on television months earlier, and for the first time in years, Danellah's heart skipped with excitement and fear at the same time. The day of the interview was filled with tension because the city seemed louder, the traffic slower, and every face she passed felt like a reminder of all the struggles she had endured just to get there. She wore her best clothes, combed her hair neatly, and held her small bag tightly, feeling like every step toward the company building was a step toward a future she had prayed for silently each night. When she entered the office, she was amazed at how organized, clean, and busy everything was, with smiling employees, computers, files, and children playing safely in the care rooms. And in that moment, she realized that this company was not just a business. It was a home for hope, and she wanted to be part of it more than anything. During the interview, Danellah answered every question honestly, telling them about her life, her struggles, and the reasons she wanted to work there, hoping her sincerity would be enough. She left the office with trembling legs, feeling both nervous and excited, because she had no way of knowing if she would be chosen among many applicants. A few days later, she received another call informing her that she had not only been accepted, but she had been selected as a manager in the company, a position of responsibility that gave her control over projects, teams, and programs, and the chance to truly make a difference in children's lives. When Danellah walked into her new office for the first time, she felt a mix of disbelief, gratitude, and nervous excitement, because she knew this moment had been built from years of suffering, patience, and determination. She worked hard, learning the company's operations, helping the children, and proving herself to the employees and supporters. Yet one thing remained a mystery. Her new boss, Ruth, was kind, generous, and brilliant. But she did not recognize Danellah as the sister she had lost years ago. And for Ruth, Danellah was a hard-working employee who had earned a place through dedication alone. Danellah carried her secret quietly in her heart, knowing that the day of reunion would come, and she continued to work tirelessly, determined to change her life and someday the life of her parents as well, because finally she had stepped into a world that could lift her out of poverty and give her family hope. Months passed, and Danellah had grown into her role as manager, respected by workers and trusted by Ruth. Yet she carried a quiet longing in her heart because even though she was finally living a life of dignity and hope, the memory of her family and the years of suffering they endured remained close to her thoughts. One evening, Ruth invited Danellah to her home for dinner. A beautiful house with lights shining warmly, the aroma of food filling the air, and a quiet sense of peace that made Danellah feel both excited and nervous, because she had never been inside such a house before, let alone shared a meal with someone as powerful and kind as Ruth. As they sat at the dinner table, enjoying the delicious food and soft music, the conversation began to flow naturally, with Ruth asking Danellah about her life, her struggles, and her journey from the city streets to the company. Danellah spoke honestly, carefully choosing her words, and Ruth listened attentively, smiling at her employee's courage and determination, unaware that this young woman had once been part of the same family she had lost years ago. Suddenly, Mr. Jimmy, who had been brought to the city by Danellah, shared a story from his heart, telling Ruth about the daughter who had disappeared years ago, describing her name, her smile, and the day she vanished from their home, and his voice shook with emotion as he recalled the long nights of worry and prayer. At that moment, something inside Ruth stirred, a deep and sudden recognition that left her unable to speak, her eyes filling with tears, and memories of her childhood, her family, and the life she had left behind came rushing back all at once. She could not believe it, but the truth was clear. Danellah, sitting beside her, was her sister, the little girl who had lived in their family home and suffered when Ruth had disappeared. Ruth's hands trembled as she reached across the table, holding Danellah's, and tears streamed down her face because she realized that God had not only lifted her from hardship, but had also guided her back to the family she had thought she had lost forever. The dinner became more than a meal. It became a reunion of hearts, the first step in healing old wounds, and a moment filled with tears, laughter, and prayers of gratitude because Ruth knew that the long years of suffering were not wasted, and that the family's journey of pain was finally turning into a story of restoration and hope. And as the evening continued, Ruth made a quiet promise to herself that she would bring her parents and sister fully into her life, sharing with them the blessings God had given, while also building a future where they would never have to suffer hunger, shame, or fear again. After the emotional dinner, Ruth could no longer hold back her feelings, because all the years of separation, longing, and unanswered prayers came rushing into her heart like a river breaking its banks. She hugged her parents tightly, feeling their tears soak her shoulders, and held Danellah close, whispering words of love and forgiveness that made them all sob together because the pain of the past had finally met the joy of reunion. The years of hunger, shame, and suffering seemed to lift from their hearts in that moment, replaced by warmth, hope, and a sense of belonging that Ruth had always dreamed of sharing with her family. The very next day, Ruth took her parents and Danellah to her home, a massive 4-floor mansion with a wide, beautiful compound that looked like a palace compared to the small, broken house they had once lived in. Inside, everything was carefully arranged, with rooms full of comfortable furniture, clean floors that shone, and spaces where laughter, music, and joy could fill the air freely, unlike the silence and sadness that had once marked their lives. Mr. Jimmy and Gabriella could not believe their eyes, and for a moment they simply stood there, holding each other's hands, overwhelmed by the reality that the daughter they had lost and thought was gone forever had returned, not only alive but triumphant and generous beyond anything they could have imagined. Ruth made sure they understood that the house, the company, and all her blessings were not just for her alone, but for the family who had endured so much, because forgiveness and love were stronger than anger, bitterness, or pride. She showed them their rooms, shared stories of her journey, and introduced them to the employees who now felt like extended family. Danellah finally felt at home in a place that once seemed impossible, and her parents began to smile again, tasting a peace they had not known in years. Ruth's generosity went beyond gifts and walls. She gave them security, respect, and dignity, showing them that God's blessings were not only personal, they were meant to restore relationships and heal hearts. As days turned into weeks, the family settled into their new life, learning to laugh together again, eat together without fear, and plan for a future where they could live fully, safely, and happily. The city that had once been harsh and unforgiving now became a place of transformation. Because Ruth had turned her pain into purpose, and the same streets that had tested her resilience were now filled with the echoes of love, hope, and the promise that suffering does not last forever when faith and perseverance guide the way. For the first time in years, Mr. Jimmy, Gabriella, and Danella felt alive, whole, and truly home, knowing that God's mercy had finally returned to their lives through the hands of the daughter they had once thought was lost forever. After the family had settled into their new life, surrounded by comfort, laughter, and the blessings Ruth had worked so hard to achieve, a new chapter of joy began to unfold when Ruth met George, a tall, handsome man whose presence made her heart light and her smile brighter. George had a kind spirit, a sense of humor, and a respect for life that reminded Ruth of the values she had held close since her childhood. Their friendship grew slowly, with long conversations about dreams, faith, and the lives they wanted to build, until it naturally turned into love, a love built on mutual respect, understanding, and the quiet strength that comes from surviving hardship. Ruth knew it was time to introduce George to her parents because she wanted them to bless their relationship and to share in the joy of her new life fully. She arranged an introduction ceremony, inviting only family, close friends, and respected members of the city, including some of the supporters of Open Heaven Care Initiative. The house was decorated with bright lights, colorful flowers, and tables filled with rich foods and drinks that overflowed, symbolizing abundance, celebration, and the fullness of life after years of struggle. The city seemed to hum with excitement as word of the ceremony spread, because Ruth's story had become an inspiration to many, a living proof that patience, faith, and perseverance could transform even the hardest lives. On the day of the introduction, the air was filled with music, laughter, and chatter, and Ruth watched as her parents greeted George warmly, offering blessings, wisdom, and love, showing that the family's journey of pain had led to a moment of unity, trust, and happiness. Guests marveled at the joy, the elegance of the celebration, and the glow of the family who had endured so much, now living proof of God's favor and the power of determination. Ruth and George stood together, smiling, knowing that this day was not only about love, but about triumph, faith, and the promise that life can turn completely around, even after darkness and despair. As the evening went on, filled with dancing, stories, and heartfelt toasts, Ruth looked around at her parents, her sister, George, and the children of her company, and she realized that every tear she had shed, every moment of hunger, every night of fear, had led to this moment of complete joy. Her heart swelled with gratitude because she had not only built a life for herself, but had restored her family, touched the lives of orphans, and now celebrated a love that promised a future full of hope. And so, in the heart of a bustling Nigerian city, surrounded by abundance, family, and love, Ruth's story reached its peak, a story of suffering transformed into triumph. Loneliness turned into reunion, and faith turned into celebration, showing that even the smallest acts of patience and courage can one day blossom into a life beyond imagination.